Matthew, your paper gifted us with a primer on the intersection of theology and science and philosophy, but you brought the paper home with some very practical recommendations for how those who minister with and to youth might incorporate some of the insights and learnings into things they did with the young people. And one of those sets of recommendations came under the heading of narrative. Help us to understand what your proposal is and how you would see it working.
Yeah, so the great philosophical theologian Alasdair MacIntyre says that the human being is essentially a storytelling animal. And so all moral education has to come through kind of these moral stories. And what we find is that when people are thinking about kind of what action do I want to perform, right? A lot of times it comes back to just a question of what's known as moral identity in the literature, of what kind of person do I see myself becoming? And indeed, in one of the foundational papers of this field of psychology of moral identity, Aquinas and Reed write that it's probably the most important thing mediating the link between one's moral judgment and actually having it result in an action. So the problem they find is that if you aren't exposed to kind of words evoking a sense of morality, or if you're exposed to words with self-interest, you actually start tending towards being a more self-interested person. If you're exposed to a lot of stories that are related to morality, you start acting much more morally. And so what this means is that the telling of biblical stories, the reading about great martyrs and religious people and the hearing of testimonies actually gets very internalized at a much subconscious level as we come to see, oh, there's a resonance between that person that I'm looking at, and that just feels right. Like, I want to be that kind of person. And so this is why I think testimonies are really important, because for a lot of people, they're not going to be reached by, oh, here's the historical evidence for Christianity. I'm convinced by philosophical arguments and the other theological reasons. It's really going to be, oh, there's something about Christians that I'm drawn to, and then those whole other reasons can come along and follow. And so how does this work itself out practically? Well, I think that we need to be constantly hearing about kind of moral exemplars. There's this other key phrase in the literature, moral elevation. It's this feeling of uplift you experience when you just feel like, wow, that was such a morally good action. And they find that it actually does result in more moral behavior. Additionally, particularly for adolescents, they need a context in which they can have what social psychologist Terry Adler calls mirrors. So these are people who can give them feedback about their behavior, and this is crucial for forming an identity. And we find these in youth groups. People sitting together, sharing about their weeks, sharing what they're going through. And one major capacity that comes online with adolescence is emotional regulation. So for small children, you always know what they're thinking and how they're feeling just because it immediately comes out. Adolescents can hide it much better. And this is indeed something that we find in many high school and college communities, is that because they're so good at emotional regulation, everybody seems completely calm on the surface. And then inside, they're all very, very, very anxious and worried and stressed about so many things. And so Christian youth groups are an opportunity for them to be vulnerable, see that other people are going through similar things, have these kind of mirrors where they can say, well, what do you think about this? And then in kind of gauging people's responses to things, start developing an identity based off of these things. And so for all of these reasons, actually, the model of the youth group is what many psychologists say are all the necessary components you need in order to experience flourishing and joy as an adolescent.